Namaste, ladies and gentlemen. We'll commence the program shortly. Before we proceed, a few gentle reminders. Kindly switch your mobile phones to silent mode or turn them off to minimize disruptions during the program. After the program, please remain in your seat in the auditorium until the guests leave. Also, as you exit the hall, maintain a steady and uninterrupted flow towards the gate. Kindly refrain from crowding on the stairs and the lounge areas. We'll begin the program shortly. The guests have arrived. May I request our distinguished guests to adorn the seats on the dais. most honored dignitaries on and off the days, invited guests and members of the Bhavan's family. Welcome to the 5th Kulapati Dr. K.M. MUNSHI Memorial Oration. Words wield extraordinary power to inspire, educate, and stir emotions. And when they are infused with passion and knowledge, they have the ability to create a lasting impression, imprinting ideas and perspectives into the hearts and minds of the listeners. Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan creates this lasting impression every year by hosting the annual Kulapati Dr. K.M. MUNSHI Memorial Oration, upholding a cherished tradition that venerates the extraordinary legacy of its founder, Dr. K.M. MUNSHI. And today, this conduit of wisdom, offering a gateway to diverse perspectives and intellectual growth, emanates from the eminent Dr. SOUMYA SWAMINATHAN, Chairperson, MS Swaminathan Research Foundation, and former Chief Scientist, World Health Organization. Before we embark on this intellectual journey, let us set the tone for this auspicious gathering. May I request Srimati Shruti Surendranath, Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan, Kochi, to lead us in a moment of prayer, invoking blessings for our proceedings. I request everyone to remain seated.
Trinayana Manikya Mauli Sphura Tara Nayaka Shekhara Smita Mukhi Mabhinavakshuruha Panibhyam Alipurna Ratna Chashakam Raktolpalam Bhibrati Saumya Ratna Katastha Rakta Charana Dhyayet Param Ambika Dhyayet Param Ambika Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu.
It's with great pleasure that I invite Sri E. Ramankutti, Director, Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan, Kochi, Kendra, to extend a heartfelt welcome and provide insights into the significance of this evening.
My humble pranams and the revered feet of Kulapati MUNSHI. Most distinguished guest of the day, Dr. SOUMYA SWAMINATHAN, Chairperson of the MS Swaminathan Research Foundation and former Chief Scientist of the World Health Organization, C.A. Venugopal C. Govind, Chairman, Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan, Kochi, Kendra, Sri G. Gopinathan, Vice Chairman, Sri K. Sankaranarayanan, Honorary Secretary and Treasurer, Srimati Meena Vishwanathan, Chief Coordinator, Programs, dignitaries of the days, invited guests, members of the Bhavan's family, friends and well-wishers. Namaste. A very hearty good evening to all of you. As you all know, 30th December is the birthday of our founder Kulapati Dr. K.M. MUNSHI. Bhavan's Kochi Kendra has been organizing the Kulapati Dr. K.M. MUNSHI Memorial Oration annually to commemorate the birthday of the Bhavan's founder. This commemorative event pays homage to his indelible contributions, his remarkable legacy, and enduring influence on our institution. In the previous years, our platform has been graced by esteemed orators such as Professor M.K. Sanu Master, Chief Justice late Thottathil B. Radhakrishnan, Dr. K.S. Radhakrishnan, and Dr. V.P. Gangadharan, whose eloquence has made an enduring impact on our gatherings. Today we are privileged to have with us Dr. SOUMYA SWAMINATHAN, Chairperson of the MS Swaminathan Research Foundation and former Chief Scientist of the World Health Organization, who will address us on this auspicious occasion. We are truly privileged to have such an exceptionally accomplished individual among us today. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in extending a heartfelt welcome to our distinguished chief guest, Dr. SOUMYA SWAMINATHAN, to this esteemed gathering. It's our honor to have our esteemed Chairman, C.A. Venugopal C. Govind, a person of great expertise, bringing immense knowledge and profound wisdom to this significant gathering. A warm welcome to you, sir. Furthermore, I extend a warm welcome to Sri Gopinathan, Vice Chairman of the Kendra, C.A.K. Shankaranarayanan, the Honorary Secretary and Treasurer, members of the Kendra Committee, Srimati Meena Vishwanathan, Chief Coordinator Programs, and other members of the Bhavan's family. A cordial welcome to the invited guests, members of the SMC, members of the PTA, and all of our well-wishers. Once again, a heartfelt and warm welcome to each and every one of you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. As we progress, it is an esteemed privilege to invite C.A. Venugopal C. Govind, Chairman Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan, Kochi, Kendra, to deliver the presidential address.
Namaste. Namaste to all of you. I join you all in offering my humble pranams to the founder of Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan, Kulapati K.M. MUNSHI ji. It's truly a great day for all of us. An extremely enjoyable, very, very pleasant day. A bright evening, excellent sunny day, and we have one of the most outstanding global celebrities with us as we pay our homage to the founder. Madam Dr. SOUMYA SWAMINATHAN, our esteemed director Sri Ramangutti, Sri Shankaranarayanan, Honorary Secretary and Treasurer, my Vice Chairman, Sri Gopinathan, incoming Vice Chairman, Professor Vijay Kumar, Dr. Rafiq, other distinguished, all other distinguished invitees, guests, Madam Meena Vishwanathan, who heads our programs division, and all educationists, education officers, research coordinator, dear teachers, friends. Kulapati K.M. MUNSHI was not just an individual. He was an institution by himself. If you look at the history of India, there may not be many sons of the soil who have been so outstanding in every respect of human life, who have enriched the lives of all of us, who has contributed so much to the humanity, and who has submitted his whole life for service of the nation and service of the people at large. It was at a time when India was struggling with the independence movement under the most difficult, brutal British reign that we had for centuries, nearly close to 2 centuries. Somehow, Munshi felt that something has to be done to ensure that we, the Indians, have the spirit of patriotism in us. We develop as wholesome, rounded personalities in all respects, and we are able to take out our best to give to the nation. And he thought the only way to do is to found an organization and build it on the trinity of the Sanatana Dharma values of Satyam, Shivam and Sundaram, and based on the pillars, built on the pillars of culture, Indian culture, Indian values, Indian ethos, ancient Indian heritage, character for the youngsters, art, literature, life. All this together has to be brought in to ensure a new generation. And the best formula for that was to found an organization which could give what is needed, Vidya as against avidya. Vidya for him was not merely education, it is a compendium of every human traits, character, culture, spirituality, strength of mind, tolerance, all that one could think of, which will lead us to knowledge, wisdom, ultimately is all Vidya. And he wanted to found it on the basis of India's ancient heritage and cultural values. That's how Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan was formed in 1938. In 5 years from now, we will be celebrating 90 years of Bhavan's existence. To pay the homage of all of us to our revered founder, we have been, as our director explaining to you, have been organizing such memorable orations to pay homage to him. Very outstanding personalities have been delivering this oration, and we are so fortunate that we have such an eminent personality as Dr. SOUMYA SWAMINATHAN to deliver this oration this year. She is a legend by herself, a globally rated, highly celebrated personality. She will be introduced to you formally by Meena Vishwanathan, a gynecologist by professional education and training, a pediatrician by training and education qualification, a neonatologist emerging, you see, out of the new areas of pediatrics, and a humanist scientist, as we find her today, a scholar par eminence, and above all, someone who has delivered to the nation globally and all to the whole world, the wealth of her wisdom, which have been acquired through years of her research, basic research. She was the inaugural chief scientist of the World Health Organization. More than 2 years she served in that capacity. And through her basic research in areas such as tuberculosis, HIV, now COVID, coronavirus and all that, she has brought solace to the whole world at large. During those very difficult days of the pandemonium, the whole world was ears for us as what she has to say. She has been advising the governments all over. She has been also advising all people how to get themselves prepared to face this calamitous situation. We are not yet out of that. A legend in her own right, and the daughter of a very illustrious legend, Dr. M.S. Swaminathan, you know. None like him in the world, none like him in this country ever, and who is wholly responsible for saying that we maintain out of poverty, we maintain ourselves out of hunger, and our nation has been progressing economically. From the very difficult days we had in the 50s and 60s, we had to go around the world with begging bowl, and it was all the innovation, the creativity, the research work, the contribution of Dr. M.S. Swaminathan to the field of agriculture that has made us what we are today. I understand that Madam SOUMYA SWAMINATHAN has taken over after the demise recently of her illustrious father as the chairman of the M.S. Swaminathan Foundation. The great work left behind him unfinished. I'm sure she will be able to carry the mantle and carry the mission. The commission report, if you remember, M.S. Swaminathan commission report in 4 volumes in 2004-2006 was to address the agrarian distress of the nation as a whole, to mitigate the agrarian distress and to bring happiness for the world, the deserving people at large. That has not been carried to its logical end. It has not been implemented because of bureaucratic hassles. And after 2004, he was engaged by the government of India and Kerala to bring out a package to address the problems that Kuttanad Alappuzha wetland ecosystem was facing. And his reports on that submitted to the government, 1,840 crore package for development of the agrarian area of Alappuzha Kuttanad also is yet to be implemented. He had visualized that there must be a Kuttanad regeneration symphony. And he wanted to make Kuttanad the world's greatest tourist spot of fishing, farming and water tourism and whatnot. Because government approved the 1,840 crore package was upgraded to 2,360 crore package, but only 700 or 800 crores have so far been spent, and that is remaining still in doldrums. I'm sure Madam Vishwanath, Madam Soumya Swaminathan has a whole lot of responsibility to take them all forward. We are all today ears to her to listen to her as what the pandemonium has left behind. How do we handle the situation? We are not yet out of it. Close to 70 crores people in the world were affected by this pandemonium called coronavirus virus, and close to 70 lakhs have died all over the world. 13 lakhs in the United States, about 7 lakhs in Brazil, close to 6 lakhs in India, 2 to 3 lakhs in most of the countries in Europe, and about 50,000 to 100,000 in most other countries. Close to 70 lakhs have died, and the variant has not yet gone out of it. You are talking about JN1 variant of the Omicron BA286, whatever it is, and it is now becoming rampant. And how do we deal with the situation and all? I'm sure Madam Vishwanath, Madam Soumya Swaminathan will have a lot of ideas to share with her. Madam, we look forward to your words of wisdom. We are so privileged, honored, enriched by your presence. Your father had blessed this same podium, same stage with another years ago. Dr. KULAPATI came MUNSHI Memorial Oration, and what a great thing that we have you today, decades later, to deliver the oration. We look forward to your addressing the gathering. Thank you very much. Once again, I welcome all of you on behalf of Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan. Thanks for all of you having joined us. Have a great evening of very enriching experience. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Before we delve into the oration, let us warmly welcome Srimati Meena Vishwanathan as she introduces our esteemed speaker, Dr. Soumya Swaminathan.
Namaste to all present here. It's really an honor and delight to introduce Dr. Soumya Swaminathan this evening. At present, living in Chennai, Dr. Soumya is a pediatrician, clinical scientist, science administrator, and a crusader against infectious diseases for the past 30 years. Since February 2023, she is the chairperson of the MS Swaminathan Research Foundation, Chennai. An outstanding medical research scientist, Dr. Soumya has been working relentlessly to find everlasting solutions to the health challenges faced by the world through research and innovation. As WHO's chief scientist, and prior to that as a scientific deputy director general for programs, she played a key role during the COVID-19 pandemic in coordinating the scientific efforts at the World Health Organization, as well as in setting up a global multilateral initiative aimed at the equitable distribution of COVID vaccine around the world, especially in the low and middle income countries. From 2015 to 17, while Dr. Soumya was working as Secretary to the Government of India for Health Research and as Director General of ICMR, her focus on bringing science and evidence into health policy making, building research capacity in Indian medical schools is commendable. Between 2009 and 11, she served as coordinator of the UNICEF, UNDP, World Bank, WHO Special Program for R&D in Tropical Diseases in Geneva. Dr. Soumya studied in India, UK, and the US, and has 480 peer-reviewed publications to her credit. She is the fellow of important science academies in India, UK, and the US National Academy of Medicine, besides being adjunct professor at Karolinska University, Sweden, and Tufts University, Boston. In our country, India, her dedication in translating research on TB and HIV into impactful programs has benefited millions of people suffering from the said diseases. With great pride and delight, I present to all of you, Dr. Soumya Swaminathan, the pride of India, a firm believer that, yes, I think after your applause. A firm believer that science and technology with ethics and equity as the foundation can find sustainable solutions to problems of the human race. Truly a karma yogi and a doyen among medical researchers. Ladies and gentlemen, I present Dr. Soumya Swaminathan to take over.
Thank you, ma'am. May I now request our Chairman CA Venugopal C. Govind to honor Dr. Soumya Swaminathan by adorning her with a ponnada. Now, without further ado, let's welcome Dr. Soumya Swaminathan to share her reflections and insights on the lessons from the pandemic. Ma'am, please.
Namaskaram. Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for this very, very warm welcome. Shri Govind, Shri Raman Kutty, other distinguished office bearers of the Bhavan, and ladies and gentlemen. It's indeed an honor and privilege to be here with you today. As we heard, the oration is named after Dr. K.M. Munshi, who's one of the architects of modern India, of independent India, and a legend and an inspiration for all the generations to follow. And also the oration has been delivered by so many eminent people in the past. I feel very humbled that I was invited to deliver this oration, and I certainly don't deserve all the rich and exaggerated introductions that were made about me. But thank you so much, you have been very kind. It's just that I found myself in a position at a time when the world was faced with a great deal of uncertainty, misery, hardships, and there was a lot of responsibility on the WHO, the World Health Organization, to find solutions. Everybody was looking to the WHO to tell countries what should be done, what is coming, what is to be expected, how do we resolve it, and people were very, very impatient, and minute to minute, they wanted updates. But the fact is that things were uncertain, they were not in black and white, and we had no magic mirror to look into the future. And we did not have any magical solutions either. But I think what was very heartening, and for me, the most positive message that I got out of the whole experience was that ultimately science delivered. It was the scientists around the world, whether they were in the private sector or the public sector, who worked round the clock and developed the tools that we needed to defeat the virus. It's not fully defeated, of course, as we all know. And I don't think mankind is ever going to defeat once and for all infectious pathogens. In the 1970s, it appeared that we might be at a point where we had won the war against infectious diseases, whether they were bacteria or viruses, and that was because of antibiotics that were discovered during the Second World War. And in the 1950s, a lot of new antibiotics, 50s and 60s, we saw a lot of new antibiotics And it appeared that we were able to treat all infections. And in fact, the Surgeon General of the United States at that time famously said, and he must have lived to regret it later, but he said that the war on infectious diseases has been won. This was somewhere in 1971. Subsequently, the investments into infectious disease research obviously went down. So this is what happens, when you think that you have already dealt with something and the problem is no longer a problem, you stop looking at it and stop investing in it. So the R&D went down, research into new drugs went down, and today if you see, you can count on one hand the number of companies who are investing in new antibiotics. It's not considered a very profitable business. So it's much more profitable to invest in anti-cancer drugs or anti-obesity drugs or lifestyle disease drugs rather than new antibiotics to fight the drug-resistant bacteria. So it's a lesson for, I think, human beings when we think that we are masters of this world, that actually no, we are not, and we have to live in harmony with all of the other living things, whether they are large animals or small or microscopic that we can't see, or whether they are plants, or whether it is nature itself. And I think that is also something that we need to learn from what we have all gone through over the last few years. So what I would like to do today is perhaps tell a little bit of my own personal reflections and takeaways from the pandemic. There could be many lessons that we have learned, but my worry is that we have not learned the lessons, and that we will again go through the same cycle of panic and neglect. Panic, today you see everyone only wants to talk about JN1 because that is the latest in the last few days. The reports are there, the press is constantly writing about it. But after a few days or weeks, we're going to forget about JN1, we will try to forget about COVID, and be taken by surprise again when a new variant comes, or when a new other pathogen actually comes up. And so we should really learn to, I think, use the lessons or the experiences we had to build something which is better for the future, rather than pretend that everything is fine and normal and we will not ever have to face these type of emergencies again, because it is very clear that zoonotic infections, that is infections which jump from animals to humans, are going to be more and more common. They are not going to disappear, they're not going to become less common. If you look at the history over the last 100 or so years, you'll find that the frequency with which these viruses are making a jump from animals to humans, whether it is bats or whether it is other kinds of animals which carry these viruses, it could be directly or indirectly through another intermediate animal, but they are able to adapt themselves, and we'll come to the reasons why this is happening. So if we start with what happened in the pandemic, and I'm not going to go into the origin of the virus because we still don't have a definitive answer into the origin of the virus. It's one of the things that WHO was criticized about, saying, WHO is pro-China and they're trying to cover up things. The fact is that WHO does not have the authority to go into any country and to do its own investigations. WHO is a member state organization, and the secretariat, so the staff who works in the WHO, they serve the member states, 192 member states. And it is for each country to follow the global rules which have been laid down by the World Health Assembly. One of the rules, of course, according to the international health regulations, is that countries need to report. When there's a list of diseases which have to be reported immediately within 48 hours, there's also unknown diseases. If you notice something different, something strange, something peculiar, like what happened in Wuhan, it's supposed to get reported right away so that WHO can take the necessary action. You can do the investigations, you alert other countries, put people on guard, and that took a long time to happen. So we lost several weeks in the early stage of the pandemic when we did not get the right kind of information coming from China. They were hoping that they would be able to contain it, but it had already spread. So again, with the kind of globalization we have today, it is estimated that any infection that starts in any remote village in the world can go around the world in 30 hours. That's all it takes. And so it is humanly impossible, to stop a virus from traveling around the world today. I think it's important to remember that as we plan and prepare for future such outbreaks. And one has to really admire Kerala for having learnt the lessons from previous experiences, the repeated Nipah outbreaks, for example, that we've had, be able to really identify, contain very rapidly when there's a new outbreak. But it requires a lot of things, and we will come to that. So those early days, we knew that there was something unusual happening in Wuhan, that there was pneumonia, and it was not picked up, no particular virus that we knew was causing it. But by the first few days of January, already they had started doing the sequencing. Of course, they have very good technical capacity. So the scientists had sequenced, and one of their scientists actually released that data, even before they got government permission. So around the 8th or 9th of January, we knew that it was a new novel coronavirus, because of course in the past we've had two other coronaviruses. Coronavirus is very common virus. In fact, bats have many hundred types of coronaviruses, but human beings also have. We get a common cold. There are at least 4 or 5 coronaviruses that cause a common cold. And before this, we've had SARS, which is a coronavirus. We've had MERS, which is a Middle East respiratory virus, which spreads through camels. And so coronaviruses have been well studied, and therefore they were very quick to identify that this coronavirus was related. It was in the same family of beta coronaviruses, but very different from the previous ones which we had seen. And so thanks to technology, genomic sequencing, and the fact that they did share that sequences on a global platform, we knew on the 10th of January that it was a novel coronavirus and that it was airborne. It was spreading from person to person. We came to, again, that data was not very well shared with us in the beginning, but soon it became clear that people who had not gone to that live market were also getting the infection. So initially, it was people who were exposed to the animals in that market were the ones who were getting sick. But later on, it was people who were never gone near the market were getting sick. Healthcare workers were getting sick. So it was clear that it was a human-to-human transmission. So the thing about zoonotic spillovers, infection, is if it comes from an animal to a human, that individual can get sick. But unless that individual can spread it to others, it is not very dangerous, because that one person might become very ill. You take care of that person, but it doesn't spread so easily, So like Ebola. Ebola is a disease which is highly fatal. And so people are extremely scared of it because it's a horrible thing. It's a hemorrhagic disease. And I've been in Africa, in Congo actually, when the Ebola outbreak was going on in 2018, right in the middle of the dense rainforest, where there is no facility, nothing. And people, were dying of Ebola because there was no diagnosis, no ability to care for them over there. But the thing with Ebola is that it is not spread that easily. You have to handle the person, close body fluids if you're in contact. That is why very close family members and healthcare workers are the ones at risk. If you're living in the neighborhood and so on, you're not going to get it unless you are in physical contact with that person. Whereas with an airborne infection, you don't have to have that close contact. So sitting in a room which is poorly ventilated for a couple of hours, if somebody is infected, then of course there's a chance that everybody is exposed and people get infected. So in the beginning, we were not sure, because the previous SARS, which took place in 2003, I don't know if how many of you remember, the one that started in Hong Kong, and again, it had emerged from southern China in one of these wet markets. What they call wet markets is where they keep live animals. And in China, the practice of wet markets is very common culturally. It is their practice to eat all types of animals. So wild and which are domesticated as well as domesticated, etc. And they're all kept under very close conditions, and they are live. So, they very easy for them to exchange these viruses. So one of the reasons why such things could happen is the practice of wet market, which they have now banned actually. So the SARS-1 also started like that, and then people got infected, but the difference was that it was only again spread to people who were in very close and prolonged contact. And this is why SARS-1 was contained within a matter of 7 to 8 months, and about 800 people died. It did spread to a few countries, but it did not spread the way that this SARS-CoV-2 has spread. Now, as Govindji was saying earlier, more than 700 million people have been infected. About 14 to 18 million lives have been lost. There have been different estimates actually globally because it is very difficult to know the exact number of people who were infected or who died, because not everybody gets tested, as you know. And in the early days, there was no testing in many countries. And so people were getting sick, they were dying, but they had no diagnosis of COVID. So the numbers, when we talk only about those which were diagnosed to have COVID and died. So there was a huge impact, of course, globally, and it became the #1 cause of death due to an infectious disease in 2020 and 2021. The other thing, of course, was a huge economic impact. And so far in the whole of the 20th and 21st centuries, this pandemic has had the biggest economic impact on the global economy, more than World War I, more than World War II, more than every other pandemic and disaster, and more than the financial collapse of 2008-9. So the global economy, of course, the IMF and others, they put out a lot of estimates, but it is all in trillions of dollars, 8 trillion, 10 trillion. I mean, you can't even count the number of zeros. Those many trillions of dollars lost in global economy. But the sad thing is that the poorer countries were more badly affected, and they bear the brunt, and even today many of them are struggling to recover. The other big impact was the loss of education on children. And again, it was the developing countries where schools were closed. And of course, many of you are teachers, and you would have gone through having to suddenly shift to online teaching and managing classes online, and the challenges and difficulties. Luckily, we are living in an age where online, a lot of things were possible. Otherwise, I don't know how this pandemic would have been if we had not been able to connect on a minute-by-minute basis with people around the world using these new technologies like Zoom and so on. It would have been a very different experience, and I'm sure it would have been much, much worse. But thanks to these technologies, one could overcome some of these challenges. So, like, teachers learnt how to do online teaching. However, we know that many, many children and many families were not able to access online education, particularly, again, the poorer families, and it is at least 200 to 300 million children were out of school globally for over 2 years. And that, again, is estimated to lead to a loss of trillions of dollars in lifetime earnings of those children who lost that very critical period of education. Suddenly you lose 2 years, and then you're expected to be in a class knowing everything that you did not learn over the past 2 years. So we have not seen the full impact yet of that. And I know that many people are trying to address, many states are trying to put in place mechanisms to provide extra tuitions, to provide support to students, but it is a difficult task. The other thing, of course, we saw was that the pandemic exacerbated the inequalities that already existed in society. And in every society, I think if you really reflect and you analyze the way that people behaved, and people were all naturally worried about themselves. Countries were worried about themselves. Politicians were worried only about protecting their own people. That is human nature. So those who had the ability were able to protect themselves, and those who did not were left to their own devices. They were left to fend for themselves. And so this is a cruel streak in society and our humanity, as was mentioned earlier, which was MUNSHI ji and other Gandhi ji and others taught us, about the importance of compassion. So we saw both sides of humanity then, right? We saw compassion and people helping each other, and particularly the healthcare workers, the doctors, nurses, and healthcare workers in many countries did not have even personal protective equipment, and yet they did not run away. They did their duty. They took care of people, and many of them, of course, lost their lives also because vaccines were not available till much later. But many countries have analyzed their own data, and they found that the communities which are marginalized, for example, in the United States, the African American community is generally poorer. They live in overcrowded housing. They work in jobs which require them to go out of their home. They very often have obesity and underlying non-communicable diseases because of their poor diet. So these are all factors associated with poverty. If you look at the infection rates and the death rates in the African American community in the US, it's at least 2 to 3 times higher than the Caucasian community. Similarly, if you look in the UK, what they call the ethnic Asian and African population, actually, they had a much higher rate of, in fact, in the beginning we used to see, when we saw the deaths in the UK, in the hospitals, a lot of people were of Asian origin, doctors and nurses who were dying. So again, the inequalities in those countries are often related to racial inequalities, but also because of the jobs that people do, So if you're a driver, bus driver or a train driver, you had to go and do your job. Those were essential services. Whereas if you were a worker in a software industry, a company, you could sit at home and work safely through your computer. So, and we saw in India that people who were in the informal sector, many of them ended up actually overnight, losing their jobs and having to migrate back into their homes. So what it showed was that the inequalities, I've got this, yeah, thanks. If you have inequalities in society, then when some external threat comes, then those actually get exacerbated. It's not that COVID created anything new. It's just made it very obvious. And at the global level also we saw, and we'll talk about that a little bit, equity. Then what we saw is a rise of misinformation and what we used to call in WHO the infodemic. And I remember my boss, Dr. Tedros, in February of 2020, he said, we have a virus epidemic, a viral epidemic going on, but we also have an infodemic going on. And what he was talking about was the proliferation of information now through social media and the internet. Yes, some of it was good information, credible information was needed, but a lot of it was either mis or disinformation. People wantonly putting out things to confuse other people. And of course, we saw that many politicians were also giving their citizens very wrong kind of information and advice. And WHO also suffered actually at that time because of these political divisions, especially between the big, powers. So this became a very big challenge for us to manage, because misinformation actually confuses people. And everybody here, I'm sure, is used to WhatsApp forwards, and we all get, half a dozen or dozens of WhatsApp forwards every day. Some of them are nice to read, they're educational, you learn something, but the majority of them are just forwards that people have not bothered to even check what is that video actually telling you, you know. It could be telling you something completely wrong. And so what was happening is that in many countries, people were depending on WhatsApp because they had no access to credible information. So I'm not talking about India, but I'm talking about small countries in Africa where there is very little trust in government, and they depended on WhatsApp that was coming from their friends and neighbors to try to find out what's going on. So very often those messages were wrong, and it created a lot of vaccine hesitancy, mistrust and distrust. And so even if the government was giving them some instructions or WHO was saying do this, do that, people were not willing to believe that because they were primed by all sorts of ridiculous rumors, including, it was very common to see that video of, this is all engineered by few people. WHO was also always being blamed, this virus, it's all been done in some lab, and WHO knows about it, everybody knows about it. Bill Gates has a hand to play. Now Bill Gates will inject you with a chip, as part of the vaccine. This kind of things were going around. Then he will control the world by injecting everybody with a chip. So naturally, if you are gullible, you would get very scared, and you would have doubts about whether to take the vaccine or not. The other thing we saw was that even though COVID is an infectious disease, it disproportionately had severe complications in people who had underlying morbidities. I think everybody got used to the word comorbidities. I don't think before the pandemic anybody used the word comorbidity, but it became a very common word, just like variant and mutation and clinical trials. All this public was not using before, but many words actually came into the vocabulary. So comorbidities means if you have underlying hypertension, diabetes, or some other heart disease, brain disease, etc., you are at a much higher risk of developing a complication, and we know older people were at higher risk. So the relationship between a non-communicable disease and a communicable disease, we started appreciating it much more. Otherwise you think the two are completely separate. What is the connection between them? Now, anything positive that came out? Well, I think I mentioned the science part of it, the investments in R&D that countries put in, the expansion of new knowledge, technologies. We went in India from one lab being able to test for, only the lab in Pune was doing the PCR test initially. All samples had to be sent to NIV Pune. And then over a period of months, we saw rapid increase in labs, rapid increase in capacity. And then, of course, we got rapid diagnostic test where any of us can get up in the morning and do a test at home. So having moved from that to this, in 2 years is a huge advance. We had vaccines in 11 months. The previous record for the shortest time for development of a vaccine is about 4 years, when the mumps vaccine was developed. Normally it takes 10 to 15 years for a vaccine to go through all the stages of trials and then get regulatory approvals. And then it takes another 5 years for countries to start providing the vaccine to its citizens. If you look at hepatitis B, infection that killed many people, the vaccine was developed long ago. It took 30 years for that vaccine to become available around the world. You look at papilloma virus, HPV vaccine, which in India we still in the process of rolling out. We still have not got a full program to protect all our girls against cervical cancer. It's one of those cancers we can eliminate if we give HPV vaccine to young girls, pre-pubertal girls. So there are only a couple of cancers, by the way, that are caused by infectious diseases that can be prevented through vaccines. And human papilloma virus is one of them, and hepatitis B is the other one, and hepatitis C as well. So the time that I was talking about, the time it takes. So it took 11 months from the discovery of a new virus to the first person being injected with an mRNA vaccine in the UK. It was an old lady, about 90 years old. She was the first woman, and US also started at the same time. So we did see huge hundreds of billions of dollars spent on R&D. and also an increased investment in health. Naturally, that was necessary, that countries had to start putting in money into health facilities, into supplies, into vaccines and drugs, etc. And then globally, I think we've seen that at least people acknowledge that in the pandemic, the cooperation between countries was not perfect. It was far from perfect. And therefore, we need a better set of rules to bind the global community during a pandemic. Because a pandemic, as the word implies, involves the whole world. It involves all the people. And so just individual countries doing their things is not sufficient. You also need a global treaty. You need mechanisms. You need rules. We saw that many countries did not have vaccines till the end of 2021. And so while in some countries there was so much of extra vaccine, anybody could take as many doses as they wanted. In other countries, even their frontline workers and older people were not getting vaccines. So we saw a lot of global inequity. We saw that even for masks, we saw it for diagnostics, we saw it for oxygen, we saw this for vaccines. So it was clear that countries which had the capacity to produce their own products were at a huge advantage. They did not have to depend on either imports or on donations. But if you took the whole continent of Africa, there was not a single factory there that produces vaccines. And very little other production goes on. And therefore, the whole of the African continent was waiting for other regions to supply them with vaccines. And this is why in the WHO we set up COVAX. COVAX was an initiative to ensure equitable vaccine supplies to the world. The idea was, as vaccines are produced, there should be some sharing of those vaccines, and we can have a common pool from which we can ship it to many countries so that at least the most at-risk groups can be vaccinated first, and then we can subsequently ramp up the vaccination, because we knew that in the beginning you would not have enough, to vaccinate the 8 billion people globally. That didn't actually happen, and COVAX did struggle throughout 2021 to get supplies of vaccine. There was also a big dependence on the Indian manufacturers, because India, as you know, has some of the largest generic manufacturers of vaccines that are high quality and affordable. But India also needed vaccines, so those vaccines were being used in India. So again, African countries felt extremely let down by everybody. And so this whole thing resulted in a lot of geopolitical change. And if you see the whole dynamics between the developing world and the developed world, there was a big shift in attitudes, I think, as a result of the experiences during the pandemic, that you can see it now in various fora. For example, India and South Africa went to the World Trade Organization, the WTO, in 2020 and said we should share intellectual property during the pandemic because this is an emergency, and so anybody who develops a vaccine or a drug must share the intellectual property so that other companies around the world can start manufacturing the product. This never got discussed till 2022. And then there was a very weak sort of declaration which did not help at all. In 2020, if countries had come together and said, yes, in this kind of emergency, we must share intellectual property because this is not the time to make profits. It's the time to save lives. So let's do everything we can to save lives. But that did not happen. So a lot of such experiences today are shaping the discussions globally about what kind of a pandemic treaty should we have that all countries will agree to abide by. Let us see what happens. By May, they are supposed to finish negotiations. But again, I know that there's a lot of internal tussle going on between those countries which have the big pharma. So they want to retain some of those intellectual property provisions so that their companies can continue to profit, and the developing world, which is calling for more of sharing and a different approach to R&D and to the fruits of R&D, which is all funded by taxpayer money anyway. even in the rich countries, a lot of the products which companies sell, the research is all done through government funding. So it is fair that, the public should benefit from those products, but it doesn't always happen. Even their own public often is denied. If you take insulin, a drug which is a life-saving drug for diabetes, there are only 3 companies around the world that control the manufacture and sale of insulin. And as a result of that, many people living even in high-income countries cannot afford insulin. It's very sad because insulin was discovered 100 years ago by Banting and Best, and they had given it as a public good. They said, we will charge $1 for the intellectual property because insulin is life-saving, should be available to the people of the world. It's not something we want to make money on. So the discoverers gave it like that, but today it's a multi-billion-dollar business anyway. So I want to take a step back to see why does a pandemic happen? What is the root cause? We talk about how to be prepared for the next one and what do we need to do, etc. So there are plenty of viruses out there. We can't get rid of them, and they are there. They have been there before human beings. They're going to continue to be there. There are at least 27 families of viruses that exist that we know of, many that we don't know of, but that we know can cause human disease. Some of them already cause infections, we know about them. Some of them have the potential, like monkeypox. Suddenly, in the middle of the COVID, we had not yet come out of COVID, we got another problem, monkeypox started spreading, mainly among homosexual men in Europe, North America. But monkeypox actually exists as a zoonotic infection in Africa for a long time. It was neglected, and it only became the focus of attention when it started spreading in the high-income countries and among gay men. And then there was sudden interest in this monkeypox and, do we have a vaccine, etc. The smallpox vaccine, as you know, smallpox is eradicated from the world. So nobody gets a smallpox vaccine now because it's the only known virus to have been eradicated. The vaccine is kept in some the stockpile, but those stockpiles are very limited. They are in only a couple of countries. So tomorrow, if you have a smallpox outbreak somewhere, because a virus still exists in the lab, and once in a while a lab accident happens, what do you do? Where do you get those vaccine from? You have to again depend on this stockpile, which is limited. So the monkeypox outbreak made everybody think, what will happen tomorrow if this monkeypox or some other pox, which is much more serious, starts spreading in the world? We need to have some vaccines and some drugs that we can deal with. So at the WHO, we said, let's make a list of all the viruses which can cause potentially a problem in humans, outbreaks, epidemics, pandemics, etc. And let's see how to be prepared. So the industry also needs to be told that these are the kind of vaccines we need to prepare. And today with the kind of technology we have, like mRNA and other technologies, it is possible to prepare a prototype vaccine, and you can keep it in the freezer, and if in the future there is a need, it can come out of the freezer, it can be quickly modified, quickly tested in human beings, and then scaled up. So the plan was that within 100 days, you should be able to have drugs and diagnostics and vaccines to use. This time it took us some 350 days or something, 320 days. That was still a record, as I said. But the next time, the ambition is to bring that time down to less than 100 days. So you can only do that if you prepare. You can't do it if you wake up, after the new pandemic starts and then start thinking, now, what shall we do? So this is the time for governments and countries and also academics and private sector and everyone to prepare. So going back to the root causes, I think it's important to acknowledge that the urbanization that we are seeing all over the world, the loss of forests, loss of biodiversity, the increased contact between humans and animals. Every day we now read in the paper, tiger came sitting outside the house, leopard came, elephant came. So it's become, and then we blame those animals, and unfortunately quite often those animals get punished. But it's we who have gone into their territory. Then global travel, like I said, 30 hours only it will take for an infection to spread from a remote village to go around the world. The illegal trade in wildlife, you see again people trading pangolins, trading, many of the species are becoming extinct, but there's a very flourishing illegal wildlife trade, and that again is actually helping to spread these viruses through these animals. So if we continue like this, then we can expect more of zoonotic spillovers, and we have to take the blame. Man has created the conditions, and we are going on improving the conditions for these viruses to spread more and more. As it is, we live in the Anthropocene. So the Anthropocene started about 70 years ago. It is the era in our planetary history where human beings are having an influence on the planet more than any other. As you know, in the past, nature was there, but now human beings are controlling nature. So we live in a very dangerous era. Now, in addition to these factors, which are causing this type of infections to happen more, and of course, species are getting extinct at an alarming rate. At least about 1 or 2 species every day are getting extinct around the world. But the other factors that impact our own health, they are also changing, right? So water, air, food, green spaces, a clean environment, clean water, sanitation, these are some of the determinants of health. And if you really look at it, whether I'm healthy or not, about 80% depends on these factors. Only 20% depends on the health facility or the hospital or the doctor or the nurse that I consult, because most of my health is because of what kind of air I'm breathing, what food am I eating, am I having a place and time to exercise, of course, if I'm getting clean water to drink and have a safe sanitation. So while water, sanitation, those things have been prioritized, are being attended to, things like air pollution and our diet are not. And it is very concerning that a recent report from the FAO and other global agencies said 74% of Indians cannot afford a healthy diet, which means the majority of people cannot afford a healthy diet. A healthy diet is expensive, and therefore if you're poor, and again this is true across countries, that the poor people, they eat the most unhealthy because they're also eating a lot of ultra-processed foods. So we have a new risk for our health today, which we call as a commercial determinants of health. These can be positive and these can be negative, but as far as food is concerned, the proliferation of ultra-processed foods in our day-to-day diet means that more often than not, it's an unhealthy diet. So these social and environmental factors contribute a lot to our health, and again, we need to think about addressing those. Yes, it's important to build hospitals, health facilities, doctors and nurses. They need to take care of the sick, but how do we prevent people from getting sick? I think we are not paying enough attention to that. I will go on to the role of science, because I think that's where the most wonderful things actually happened. And if start with the story of the mRNA, the 2 people who got the Nobel Prize for Medicine this year, one is a Hungarian woman scientist, Katalin Karikó, the other is an American man, Drew Weissman, and they got it for their discovery of mRNA, which, as you know, the mRNA vaccines were used, except in India and many, many parts of the world. They were the most widely used vaccines. Now, and they have a huge potential actually for many other diseases. Now, Katalin Kariko, the Hungarian who went to the US after her master's to do her PhD, she got interested in mRNA, and mRNA is actually nothing but messenger RNA. It takes the message from the DNA in the cell, and then it conveys that message to the ribosomes, which make protein. So it takes the DNA and then it conveys the message in a way that the ribosomal RNA then makes the protein. So she was trying to see how you can influence this messenger RNA actually. Can you start giving it messages, you know, to tell the cell to make different kinds of proteins? That research she started in the early 1990s, and her story is quite interesting because she faced a lot of challenges in her life, and partly because she was a woman, her male colleagues were kept in their positions. She was, every time she did not get a grant, she was asked to leave and so on. But anyway, she persevered, and in 2013 she started working for BioNTech, the company that ultimately made the Pfizer vaccine. At the time when she was working on mRNA, she herself says that I had no idea that this mRNA one day is going to be used to make a vaccine to save people during a pandemic or for any other thing. My interest was in finding out that mechanism of how mRNA works, whether it can be controlled or not. So the lesson from the work, which was recognized by the Nobel Prize, and most of the Nobel Prizes, they recognize the work which was done for a pure basic understanding of biology. So it is important to recognize that investment in science is what will pay off in the long run, and for any country to become a developed country and a big economy, it's absolutely important to invest in science, but also in scientific institutions as well as in individuals, in young people, so that they take a career in science and they are supported through that career. So the investment in science, I think, is the biggest lesson for me. And again, it cannot be done after an emergency comes. You can't say, now I'll invest more. You have to do it right from the beginning, and you have to do it consistently, and you have to do it across a number of disciplines, because today it's all interdisciplinary science that leads to big discoveries. It's not, it's very unusual that one individual, and that's why you see even the Nobel Prizes are shared by several people nowadays. Similarly, we saw a lot of progress in genomic surveillance in many countries, expanding the capacity to do this kind of surveillance. Basically, it is looking at the DNA or the RNA of the bacteria or the virus to understand its properties. And that's how, I mean, we talk today about JN1 and we talk about BA2.86. All that is because we have the whole genome of the virus that has been sequenced, and we can classify it based on its properties of the new mutations. So this now technology can be used, for example, to do wastewater surveillance. A city corporation can put in place a way in which they can regularly do surveillance of wastewater. Many countries were doing surveillance of the airline waste material from the toilets to see how much COVID was actually still circulating. So Bangalore city has a program where they tied up with a scientific institution where they look at wastewater surveillance of COVID. And in the last 3 weeks, they could see the viral load in the wastewater, the sewage going up. So they could tell the corporation that COVID is circulating much more in the community now than it was last month. So you can take some action, some preventive action based on that type of surveillance. So I think putting in place that type of surveillance using the new tools is going to be very important. And we also saw the explosion of digital technologies, mobile apps, telehealth, telemedicine, and the use of artificial intelligence. Today we are seeing in every field, including in medicine, AI is coming in to read your x-rays, to read your pathology slides, to read even the cough monitors. The algorithms, people are trying to develop algorithms just by coughing. Can you tell whether this is TB or it's a pneumonia, or it is COVID, or it is cancer, So many applications of artificial intelligence, wearable devices. Today, people have a lot of wearable devices you can use. In fact, you can become obsessed, I think, if you are with a wearable device which is constantly telling you whether you're sleeping well or your sleep is disturbed, your heart rate, your respiratory rate, your oxygen, everything today's devices can tell. So it's very good for understanding and for research and science. And also telehealth we saw in India and in many countries. So all of those things offer us the potential today to use it to solve some of our other problems. And then the last part of this, of course, is the science communication and the science literacy and the building of trust in communities. We saw in many countries, there was in fact scientific papers published that looked at the correlation between trust between people and their government, and also trust between people in the community and the mortality due to COVID. And there was a clear relationship. The higher the trust levels in certain countries, the better was the outcomes, the more was the uptake of vaccines. The lower the trust, less was the uptake of vaccines, and also the COVID outcomes were poor. So we know that the building of communities and that feeling of being part of a community, helping each other out, taking local decisions, citizen groups forming, helping each other, all of these played a really important role, not just in the COVID, but whenever we have a problem or an emergency, I think we see the best of people also at that time. So if I want to end with maybe a few lessons that we learned, just to summarize, from the experiences, the first is that we have to be prepared. And if we're talking about a health crisis, then our health system needs to be prepared, it needs to be resilient, and it needs to have the health workforce, the trained people there. They need to have a supply chain, they need to have the supplies, they need to have obviously the financing which is needed, and also the leadership. The leadership is extremely important. You need to have an empowered leadership. You cannot wait for decisions to come from somewhere else and then taking several days, because the problem is local. The decision also has to be local. Action has to be taken right away. That's the only way to prevent pandemics in the future, is if the local authorities are so well prepared that the moment they see a signal, they know what action to take. That means at your district, sub-district level, you need a team of very well-trained public health people who can spot these things. And of course, today with better surveillance, better data, they need to be also able to act on the data. So I think preparation at all levels, global, national, state, but more importantly at the sub-state level and the communities is very important. The second, I've already talked about investing in science and research institutions, research infrastructure, and also making communities, making our public aware of the importance of science and research. It was good, I think, during the pandemic. People every day were reading in the newspaper about the advances, the clinical trials, what are the new things coming out. I think people appreciated that. When we see what we are able to do in the space sector, we feel proud that our space scientists, and many of them are women, they are, landed Chandrayaan on the moon, and so much we've done advance, all using indigenous technology. So there's a pride, but it also means more young people may be also motivated to take up a career in science. Third lesson, we have to prioritize public health and public goods, which benefit everyone. And that means the government really needs to have a plan as to what are the public health priorities, where are there gaps, where do we need more investment, which are the products which we lack today. If you look at go to a primary healthcare center today, you'll find that there are hardly any diagnostics, very minimal. Treatment, we are still better, we have drugs. But diagnostics, no, it depends on the doctor to make a clinical diagnosis. So critical gaps, and like I talked about vaccines for existing diseases, but also for future emerging infections. We need to prepare prototype vaccines and keep them. And the stewardship of that kind of research and the financing for those products has to come from government to a large extent. And of course, the private sector plays a very important role, but without that coming together of the government and the private sector, that will not happen. Then the next lesson is to address all these risk factors and determinants I talked about. Can we really begin to live in better harmony with nature? Can we address air pollution? Can we look at our agricultural practices to improve nutrition? Food, not just for the sake of filling our stomachs, but to provide us a good nutrition. Can we protect whatever forests, wetlands, and the marine environment that we have left? We've already destroyed and damaged a lot. At least can we protect and try to restore some of the degraded and stop building, for our own sakes. We are willing to destroy nature, we destroy wetlands, and we are seeing the consequences of that through repeated floods many of our cities are facing today. I think it was Gandhiji who said that, nature has provided for everybody's need, but not everybody's greed. And my father was very fond of that quotation, and he used to often repeat that. So I think if we share equitably, we can all, I think there's enough that nature has given us, but if we want more and more for ourselves, then we're not going to be in a good place. We can use many of the government schemes like the PDS, school meals, Anganwadi. We have many schemes through which we can improve the nutrition of people, especially those who cannot afford to buy very nutritious food. We can also use regulation and rules. For example, the food safety rules can be tightened and made stricter so that companies are forced to sell healthier products. If you look at some of the sugar-sweetened beverages or even the so-called health drinks today, and you look at the composition of them at the back, then you will be shocked that if you take 10 grams of that product or 100 ml, how much sugar is going into your body, and this is all just empty calories with no other nutrition. So we need to discourage such products in the market, but we should also encourage them to move towards healthier products, and many companies are consciously trying to do that, but regulation helps. And when I was in Singapore recently, I saw that the government put in a regulation there where they put a label on the front of every product, and they have a classification A, B, C, D. If you are A and B, that means nutritionally you are above the benchmarks. If you are C or D, that means you're either very high in fat, sugar, or salt. And so when a consumer sees that label right on the front of the packet, then they are much more likely to go for a healthier product than an unhealthy, and automatically the companies start trying to improve their products to meet those standards. So I think standards and rules and laws and regulations can incentivize people to do better. Urban planning is going to be very important. That's part of our protection of biodiversity, and having green spaces was shown to be highly protective of health. People who live in areas which have a green space or a park where they can go for a walk have better physical and mental health than people who don't have access to such facilities. I talked about communities earlier. A longest running study that looks at human health and longevity found that the one factor that impacted how long you live is not your habits or your diet or your exercise, but it is having friends and having that social support. So especially as you age, it's really important to maintain those linkages, those friendships. And we all suffered during the pandemic from loneliness, and mental health problems increase, loneliness, depression, anxiety, all of that actually increase, particularly in young people. And so at all ages, you need your friends, your peer group. So making sure that those stay in place are going to be very important. And then I think ultimately equity it should be a driving principle, of everything we do, and it goes back, to a lot for a few people versus something for everyone. So what type of society do we want to be in, live in, or we want to build? I think if we keep equity at the heart of all policies or all actions that we take, which is what people like Gandhiji were advocating for when Gandhiji said, think of the face of the poorest man or woman, and then contemplate or reflect on whether your actions, what you are proposing, is it going to benefit that individual? And today I don't think we really do that when we are thinking about a new plan or a program. And then ultimately, again, it's the community and its behavior, population behavior, is very important in determining our future health. And so where behavior change is needed, it's always very difficult. Even yourself, when you think about changing your own behavior, it's always easier said than done. As a doctor, it's very easy to give advice, do this, this, this. You can give 5 instructions to your patient. But when you put yourself in the shoes, and I remember as a TB doctor, when I first started my career, I used to sit in the clinic and give lectures to patients, why are you doing this and that? And then I started visiting the homes of these patients and saw how they live, in what terrible conditions they are living and how they are making their ends meet. Then I stopped lecturing them, because you have to see what people can and cannot do before we start actually giving advice. So again, it goes back to the issue of the big differentials that we have in our society today, which probably we need to address if we really want to have an equitable society in the 21st century. This is what the Sustainable Development Goals really talk about, living holistically. And today we talk about One Health. In fact, I think the Kerala Science and Technology Council has chosen One Health as a path to Kerala's prosperity for the Science Congress this year, in 2024. So I think that's a wonderful opportunity really to reflect and to think about how we can live in harmony with our environment and yet be an economy that is thriving. And again, I would like to end with something that my father was fond of always quoting. And the government of Bhutan was the first one to develop a gross national happiness index and to measure gross national happiness. And so he always said that rather than GDP, we need to look at the happiness and the well-being of people as an indicator of a country's progress. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am, for that enriching talk. Now we have the question and answer session. Dear audience, if you have any question, kindly raise your hands and the microphone will be provided to you. Also be aware that due to paucity of time, we can accommodate the first 5 questions.
Thank you, Dr. Soumya Swaminathan, for this extremely informative and comprehensive lecture that you gave. I think the people of Kochi hasn't heard about this thing. If they have heard, if much more publicity have been given, this hall may not be sufficient to accommodate all the people, because it may town hall may be needed. And one thing that could be done is, at least I think they have recorded this thing, and you can put it, the entire thing, in social media, so that all the people who are not available here could take part of it, including the press. And that is I think the Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan should do that. That's point one. The other thing is that the comprehensiveness, that also we never expected, because the way you did, not just as a doctor, but as like a social scientist. And while the person who introduced you said of around 200, 300 peer review research papers that has been published by you. So that type of depth that you have is very rare, and we are very grateful to you. Thank you.
Namaste, ma'am. During this pandemic time, actually, we were literally behind the bars. And we were actually doing everything using the laptop, mobile phone. And considering the present situation, even though pandemic is there, we are tempted to consider it as a common cold. That means we are not giving too much seriousness to the situation. So, as a human being, we love to travel a lot. We want to explore the world. And ma'am, my question is, do you think that we need to travel curbs? That means that we need to limit our travels, we need to limit our, that means seeing around the world and all, considering the present situation.
So I think the situation today is very different from what it was in 2020 and 21, because the main difference is that most people are vaccinated. And therefore we have some immunity which seems to be still protecting us from, at least from severe disease. So I think we were very lucky that vaccines, so many different vaccines were developed which offered such good protection. It doesn't protect us from getting infected, that's very clear, because we are having wave after wave of infections. But it does still protect us from getting severely ill. Now, having said that, there are always some people who are going to get very ill and some people who will end up in the hospital and die. We see that with all infections, influenza also, because those data don't come out in the public. So you don't know how many people are admitted with influenza and how many are dying, but there is every year loss of lives due to that. So similarly, COVID will continue to take lives. So I think what we have to do is to assess, be able to assess your own risk and of those around you, and then take action as appropriate. For example, wearing a mask. Now we know there is a surge. There is a surge going on today, and so it's a maybe good idea to wear a mask, particularly if either you're protecting yourself or you're also protecting others. If you have a cold and cough, then that's the right thing to do, especially if you're in a closed environment. So similarly, if you're unwell, you don't want to travel or go to the office and expose others. So that's why it's encouraged that maybe you take a day or two off and work from home and things like that. So I think we've learned all those behaviors today which can protect us and protect others. We cannot go back to those days when we put in those kind of very severe restrictions, you know, because we saw the economic impact that had. So I think you have to take a balanced approach, particularly since we're going to have to live with this virus. It's not that there's a defined time and it's going to go away after that. It's with us now. And it is still changing, and we can expect it to have these type of new variants coming in. But what we need in place is the surveillance mechanism and the data systems and the public health action, so that the public can be periodically informed of what the new strains are, what is the impact, what they should be doing, whether a booster dose is needed, and so on. That can come only by studying the data. continuously and regularly updating. So that is the way we will have to deal with this, and we shouldn't also take it out of proportion to other things. You know, that if you look at the number of deaths being caused by other infectious diseases, I don't think many people know that every day 1,000 people in India die of tuberculosis. Every day, year after year after year. You know, but when there's one COVID death, it's on the front pages. There's one dengue death, it's on the front pages. But because this TB has been there for a very long time, and it also mostly affects people who are poor, who are living in some remote areas, doesn't get reported. So I think we have to look at public health in a balanced way and not just blow one thing out of proportion. At the same time, it is a still relatively new infection. It's only 4 years that this virus has been around with us. It could still give us some surprises. So we have to be prepared, we have to be vigilant, but we also have to take a balance, you know, between our lives and the risk of getting ill. So the risk benefit is what changed. In 2020, why we behave like that and why we are behaving differently now is that the risks and the outcomes, you know, the risk-benefit analysis today is very different, and to a large extent because of the tools that we have, the diagnostics, the drugs, the vaccines. We know how to deal with this. But we have to accept that there is going to be always now a certain amount of morbidity and mortality due to COVID, like all the other infections we live with.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am. Can we have the next question?
Namaste, madam. You have mentioned about vaccination. Almost all our students above 15 years have taken the COVID-19 vaccine. Is there any long-term effect or risk factor on their health?
You're asking mainly for children, students?
Yes, especially for children. Is there any long-term effect on their health by taking this vaccine?
So far, again, we're very lucky that there hasn't seemed to be any long-term negative effects of any of the vaccines. Yes, there are side effects of a few of them, rare side effects, but most of those have occurred in the first 4 to 6 weeks after taking the vaccine. But long-term effects not been reported. So it's very, very, I must say, lucky, and that so many different types of vaccines that were used, and billions of people have been vaccinated, and the incidence of side effects has been very low. I just want to mention one thing, that a lot of people think that the long-term effects of the vaccine result in heart attacks and things like that, and it's especially in younger people. Actually, what it is, it's the effect of COVID. We know that COVID has long-term effects on cardiovascular health, on metabolic health. The rate of diabetes in people who've suffered from COVID is more than double. Even dementia and things like that have been observed in those studies which have followed up people over a long time. And also ICMR own studies show that heart attacks are more common in people who have suffered from COVID. So people automatically jump to the vaccine as a cause of this type of health problems, but actually it is COVID, and that is why it is not another common cold. It's because it does have some serious long-term effects. And as you know, many people, about 5 to 10% of people who suffer from COVID have something called long COVID, which means that for months together they are suffering from some symptoms, body ache, fatigue, what they call brain fog, not able to concentrate. I know a lot of people who've had those. So it's not just a respiratory virus, a cold, and you get over it and you're normal. It does have effects on many of our organ systems. That's, I think, a difference between that and a common cold virus.
Next question, please.
I think this may be the last one. Good evening, doctor. Nice talk. I just had one question. I mean, in some of the developed countries, people are receiving boosters, 3rd booster, 4th booster, 5th booster. So what's your opinion, take on that? I mean, does it really give any protection? Is it really necessary, or it's just, what's your take? Because in many of the developed countries, some of my cousins abroad, for example, they have received 4, 5. In fact, even recently they had received a booster.
So what we know, I think, from the studies is that the incremental effect of the 4th, 5th, 6th dose is very minimal. So the first 2 doses were very important, and the 3rd dose further boosted that immunity. Most people also had a natural infection. Majority of people, especially during Omicron, had an infection, many asymptomatic, many were symptomatic. So that also served as a booster. And so I think the effect of the vaccine that we want is the effect on the T-cell immunity, the cell-mediated immunity, which is what protects us from getting severely ill. The antibody levels do drop. So if you do look at studies which just look at antibody levels, they drop, and then you can be very worried that my antibodies are gone and I'm at risk. But actually the memory cells are there and the T cells are there to protect us. So there's no evidence that taking repeated boosters is going to help us. So, but in the future, maybe there will be a time after 3-4 years that our immunity has gone down enough that the older people might need a booster, or everybody might need a booster. That we cannot predict now. So this is why it's important to continue to study. And like influenza, we do recommend that the older people, pregnant women, young children should take an influenza vaccine on a yearly basis, because every year the influenza vaccine strain changes. It's possible that somewhere in the future we may say certain groups of people should take a COVID booster, every 3 years or something, but we don't know at this point.
Thank you, ma'am. We'll have the last question now.
This has a reference to your statement regarding the 2023 Nobel Prize for Medicine having given for the invention of vaccination. But if you look at the history of Nobel Prizes, no scientist has received a Nobel Prize within less than 25 or 30 years. Even if you look at C.V. Raman effect and the black hole theory of Chandrasekhar, they have waited for several years. So do you feel that the decision of the Nobel Foundation to give Nobel Prizes for medicine for this invention was in haste or inappropriate?
So as I mentioned, the research of these scientists started in the early 90s. So it's actually 30 years of research. And it's because of their research that the companies and others were able to produce these vaccines in such a short period of time. So it was, of course, others also were involved, like the lipids, which you need to coat the mRNA. That was done by a different group of scientists, and they have also received many awards. So I think this was a culmination or a proof that all of the work that they had done actually delivered a product when it was needed. And today, the potential for mRNA to be used for many, many things, including cancers, monoclonal antibodies, other vaccines, etc., is huge. So there's huge amount of investment and interest in this. So I think it was very well deserved. It was not something which they had done in the last 2-3 years. It was over 30 years of work. People got to know of it and its importance, of course, because of the pandemic. So many lives were saved because of these vaccines. So I think they very well deserved choice.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you all. To express our gratitude, I earnestly request C.A. Venugopal C. Govind, Chairman Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan Kochi Kendra, to present a memento to Dr. Soumya Swaminathan as a token of appreciation. In gratitude and appreciation for all who contributed to this evening's success, I invite CA K. Shankaran Narayanan, Honorary Secretary, cum Honorary Treasurer, to propose the vote of thanks.
Namaste. Honored guest of the day, Dr. Soumya Swaminathan, Chairman C.A. Venugopal C. Govind, Vice Chairman Gopinathan, Director Sri E. Ramakutti, Chief Coordinator of Programs, and Srimati Meena Vishwanathan, and other dignitaries of and on the dais, invited guests, members of the Bhavan fraternity. Today we are fortunate to have Dr. Soumya Swaminathan, Chairperson, MS Swaminathan Research Foundation, to deliver KULAPATI Dr. K. MUNSHI Memorial Oration 23 on lessons from the pandemic. The lecture was very informative, educative, and of great experience listening to Madam Dr. Soumya Swaminathan. Madam, on behalf of everyone present here, let me thank you for the enlightening session. I also extend my thanks to our Chairman, Sri Venugopal Sri Govind, Vice Chairman Gopinathan, Director Ramakutti, Srimati Meena Vishwanathan, members of the Kendra Committee, and other dignitaries of the dais, invited guests, parents, well-wishers, and members of the Bhavan fraternity for being such a well-receiving audience. Thank you once for all. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. As this remarkable event draws to a close, let's rise for the national anthem.
जन गण मन अधिनायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता पंजाब सिंध गुजरात मराठा द्राविड उत्कल बंगा विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उच्चल जलधि तरंगा तव शुभ नामे जागे तव शुभ आशीष मांगे गाहे तव जय गाथा जन गण मंगलदायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता जय हे जय हे जय हे जय 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 हे
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for gracing us with your presence this evening. May the echoes of today's deliberations resonate in our hearts and minds for years to come. Good evening and Jai Hind. Audience, kindly remain seated till the guests leave the hall.